thank you for joining me tonight. I'm so excited to have you. And since we're live, I'm going to do an intro and we're going to jump right to it.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you. Okay, so Paulette Kennedy, originally from the Ozarks, she now divides her time between her Missouri hometown and LA, where she lives with her family and a menagerie of rescue pets. Lovely. When she isn't writing, she enjoys tending to her garden, knitting, finding unique vintage treasures at thrift stores and flea markets. As a history lover, she can get lost for days in her research, and I want to talk about that. Learning everything she can about the places in her stories and what her characters might have experienced in the past. Paulette's first novel was Parting the Veil. Her latest novel, which is climbing up the Amazon charts, is The Witch of Tin Mountain, a witchy Southern Gothic set in rural northern Arkansas during the Great Depression. Thank you for holding it up, the beautiful cover. It's coming February 1st, 2023, just in a few days from Lake Union Publishing, but it's still available. It was a Amazon editor's choice this month, right? So it's still available for readers for the next few days on Kindle.
Yes, and Amazon First Reads for the next few days. So it'll be available for free on Kindle for just a few more days. And then official launch date is February 1st. So
awesome. Congratulations. It's doing phenomenal. The reviews are phenomenal and I loved it. So why don't you start by telling us the inspiration for the story and the history that inspired the story, including some of your own family history?
Yes, so I had several inspirations for the story. So the heart of the story is the haunting that affects this family of women who are generational healers in the Ozarks. They're granny women or folk healers. And so all three generations have a little bit to do with this story going back almost 150 years. But the original heart of the inspiration was the Bell Witch legend out of Adams, Tennessee, that happened in the early part of the 19th century, like in the early settler days of Appalachia. My dad was from Tennessee originally, and so he told me a lot of stories about Tennessee and growing up there, and he grew up during the Great Depression. So my decision to set the story where I did, which is in Northwest Arkansas, had a little bit to do with like what I was familiar with. And also like that heart folk story had to do with like some of the folk tales that he told me having grown up in Tennessee. So I kind of merged the two a little bit. And the Ozarks and Appalachia in general have a lot in common. There was a lot of cross migration between the two areas. So a lot of the music, a lot of the language, the colloquialisms, all of that are like very similar to what you'll hear in Tennessee and Kentucky and like Southern Ohio. And so like that kind of is the heart of the story. And then there are a lot of personal stories that my dad told me as I was growing up that happened to him, that he experienced. Some of the spooky stuff that's in the book are directly like oral tradition stories that he told me. And so, so I was able to incorporate all of that into the novel. And so that kind of tied in with the Bell Witch legend. And I kind of pulled my own like take on that legend and used that kind of as the root of the haunting that the townsfolk of Tin Mountain experience.
I was reading on some of your reviews, and when someone said this is like the best type of spooky book to read at night, like by the fire in the winter. And so I did that last week, and then I went to bed right after, and I had like the scariest dream.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And that's like a testament to your writing, though. It was so like it was very spooky, and I loved it. And
well,
so
thank you.
I was just rereading your author's note because, of course, I'm such a nerd about that stuff. I love reading research notes, and the research that you did was fascinating about witchcraft and about the Ozarks and about folklore. And so talk to me about your research process and some of your research for this story.
I did a lot of research in a lot of different avenues of witchcraft, and especially like folk magic traditions. A lot of the characters in the novel kind of have a little bit of a heritage of that's passed down from generation to generation. And the Werner family through the grimoire, they passed that on down through generations. And So that kind of thing happens like in the Ozarks. It's mostly with like recipes and things like that. But like I saved several of like my mom's recipes that she had handwritten, and like they're precious to me. And so sometimes women would save those kind of herbal remedies and folk medicine and even like charms and folk magic, because like I can remember like when I was pregnant with my daughter, like one of the things that we do is we tie our wedding ring on a string and we dangle it over our bellies. And whether it turns in a circle or moves back and forth is a way of divining whether you're having a girl or a boy. So it's just like stuff like that. One of the cures for warts that my mom, or like just anything like a mole that you wanted to get rid of, was like cutting a potato into 4 pieces and burying it under the light of a full moon. You know, so there's like things like this. And my mother's family especially was very religious. Like my grandmother was like Pentecostal, like holy roller lady, and she still did a lot of like this folk healing, folk charms, you know, things like that. So it's kind of funny, like some of it is just what I grew up with, like experiencing in the Ozarks, and just that kind of thing that gets passed down from grandmother to daughter and granddaughter. So I incorporated some of that kind of thing, but I also did a lot of research. There's a historian called, his name was Vance Randolph, and he was actually, I think, from Ohio or maybe Illinois. He wasn't from the Ozarks originally, but he came to the Ozarks and lived there in like the 1920s to the 1930s because he was so fascinated by the area. And so he cataloged a lot of our like folk traditions and like our dialect and like all the little things that make the Ozarks what the Ozarks are. So I consulted his books on like folk magic and superstitions, very superstitious people that live in the Ozarks. And so there's a lot of like things that you don't do at certain times of the year and you do at certain times of the year. And, you know, the farmers follow the farmers' almanacs and things like that. So there's a lot of like that kind of, it's not a cult, like I wouldn't go that far, but there's a lot of like that esoteric knowledge that has just been passed down. Yeah. And people just live by it, especially in rural areas, even still. And they just do it. Like, it's just something that you do. Like, I remember one time when I was a teenager and my mom and the neighbor were canning, and they were canning tomatoes, and they wouldn't let me help because it was that time of the month and I would ruin the whole batch.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So it's just stuff like that I kind of like, I didn't put a lot of those exact anecdotes in the book, but that's kind of the culture that I come from. Yeah. It's like there's just a lot of superstitions and a lot of like mythology that kind of goes around just normal day-to-day life. And water witching, like one of my characters is a water witcher, and my great aunt was a well-known water witcher. Like people would go to her whenever they needed to dig a well, and she would take a peach tree limb and she would go out and she would divine for water.
And so interesting. Yeah.
So, but I did do a lot of research on like the Salem witch trials and things like that for very specific reasons, for like the mass hysteria element that's in the book and all of that as well. So I did like the folk magic side, and then I did like, you know, what actual witchcraft trials were like. So kind of a little bit of everything.
Excellent. Yeah. Very, very cool. There, one part of your author's note to that point was you talk about how the dialect and vocabulary and colloquial speech in the Ozarks. And I think that you did a really good job of like weaving that in without being overwhelming. Like, I think it's felt really authentic. And did you find that hard to balance? Like, how did you do that?
It was a little tricky to balance because I didn't want to make it into a caricature. I didn't want my characters to become that like Ozarkian hillbilly caricature. But at the same time, like, this is how my people talk. Like, I mean, all of those colloquialisms in the book, like my mom, my aunts, like my grandmother, they said all of those things. And they said them like as often as my characters do in the book. Like, Restless is a tomcat and or long-tailed tomcat in a room full of rockers. I mean, I heard that so many times growing up.
So funny.
Useless as tits on a boar hog. I mean, those things are just what people say here. Like,
and
they're
them's the
very
berries.
colorful
Is that the
things.
one? Them's the berries. Is that?
Yeah, them's the
something about
berries. That's more of a little bit. That's kind of a little bit more of a 1930s, 1920s, 1930s
Oh, okay.
slang.
Yeah.
It's just like a slang for, oh, that's a great thing that happened, you know, or
Okay,
how
yeah.
awesome, you know. So that was kind of more of a widespread saying, like probably all over the US at that time. But yeah, some of the regional colloquialisms, like those are very like specific to the Ozarks and probably like Appalachia more. And than the deep South.
Right,
so
right.
Yeah.
That was great. Those were great. Was there anything you researched that really surprised you or changed the trajectory of the story in any way?
I would say my research on Salem kind of changed just how dramatic I made some elements or some scenes in the book.
Yeah.
Especially kind of toward the end. I had done a little bit of like rudimentary, like very surface level research on Salem before I started writing this book. But like when I started writing this book, I really did a deep dive into what it was really, really like. And it was stunning, like that could happen, you know?
Yes.
To the level that it did, and how wild things got in Salem.
Yes.
Not only with like just the accusations and everything that happened during the trials, but some of the anecdotes, it's a little spooky, you know. It's like there's the normal stuff that happened, but the reason why I kind of did things the way that I did is like there was something going on there, whether it was like collective consciousness or what was
area.
It was very dark.
Yeah, we I live like 20 minutes from Salem's, and so my daughters and I have gone to the museums. We're just fascinated with the culture and that whole era, that story. Yeah, it's fascinating. So this is a generational story, you know, told from 3 generations of women, different perspectives, different eras, focusing primarily on young Deirdre in the late 1800s and her granddaughter Gracie in the 1930s. And was this always the plan for like the structure of the story? And did you find that difficult to write? Because I'm always in awe of people who write from different perspectives, different like dual narratives, things like that. So
yeah, you know, I didn't start out wanting to necessarily write a dual point of view book. It kind of happened a little bit organically. Grace Lynn's voice, and her character was the first character that came to me when I first started writing, and her voice came through so strong. She felt like a real person to me. And so I started with her story. And then as I started kind of writing hers, I was like, I was going to keep Deirdre just in like 1931 and just like have her relay what happened to Gracie through like telling her stories and everything. But then I'm like, you know, her story deserves to be told too, and like how everything happened for things to end up the way that they did in 1931. And so I decided to go ahead and braid her narrative in and then use kind of the grimoire as the framing elements, like the frame narrative, to kind of add in those clues and missing pieces that I couldn't tell on her timeline or Gracie's. And, you know, I mean, I get that they kind of sound alike. They sound similar. A lot of that has to do with them growing up in the region, you know,
right.
It's like they did have like a very similar upbringing in some ways. But it's tricky to do multiple points of view. It's very difficult. It's probably the hardest thing that I've ever done this far as a writer. I don't know that I'll do it anytime soon again.
I get it. Yeah.
Yes, I had a lot of editorial help with making it work. And I'm very appreciative of that. Jody Warshaw and Melissa
Jody,
helped me a ton with that.
Well, we all need that help. I mean,
yes,
it's so absolutely hard. Yeah. And that's a good segue to my next question. You talked a little bit. Tell me about your writing process. I ask every writer who comes on, like, are you a plotter or are you a pantser? Do you write by the seat of your pants or do you plot it out? It sounds like you're more of a pantser because you said that Gracie's voice came through first and then you kind of built from there. But like, just talk to me. We have a lot of writers who listen in. So talk to me about your process.
I am a tent puller. And so how that works for me is I start out with a very minimal structure. So I start out with my inciting incident, my midpoint climax, and my climax.
Okay.
My final climax. And that's and then everything else I do end up, writing a synopsis and an outline before I start writing in earnest.
Okay.
Sometimes, like, if a scene really inspires me, I'll write out of order, but I typically tend to be a linear writer. So whenever I was writing The Witch of Tin Mountain, I plotted out Gracie's timeline first. And then when I decided that I was going to write Deirdre's timeline, I plotted hers out. And then I kind of wove them together.
Okay.
And then added in the grimoire as kind of like an interlude, like where I felt like we needed a little bit extra information.
I like that. Yeah, that was great. And so I always ask this for my own, I'm just curious, do you use Scrivener or Word, or what do you like to use for writing? Like Scrivener is the word processing document, like program. Okay, you use Word. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So curious. All right. And so another question, you talked about how Gracie was the one that came to you first. And I mean, I loved all these strong female characters in this book, but I think Gracie was my favorite because of her spunk. And did you do you have trouble when you finish up a project of letting go of the characters? Or are you just like, no, that's done? Or would you ever consider putting them in another book? That's a question I get. And I'm always curious what other writers do.
This book is the first book that I've ever actually considered potentially bringing some of these characters back into another book and maybe continuing the story. I never really set out to like write a series or anything like that. I really love a standalone story that you can finish and feel satisfied with. And I did want this to be able to stand alone, of course, but I am open to it becoming a series eventually. And there's a potential for that, at the ending.
There is.
We'll see what happens,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Cool. Yeah. So your voice and style of writing, when I was reading it, it reminded me a little bit of Alice Hoffman, who I love. And I was just wondering, like, who are some of the authors that have influenced you, that you love, that, you aspire to, like, are you an Alice Hoffman fan? All of that.
Yes, I'm absolutely an Alice Hoffman fan, and that wonderful world that she created with practical magic and every book that came out. The Owens family, yes, absolutely. Yeah, she's an influence. Anne Rice is an influence. The Mayfair Witches. Gosh, there's so many. Louisa Morgan, she's also an amazing witchy writer that writes historical fiction. Alex Harrow's The Once and Future Witches. There were a lot of like inspirational books. Also, I have to mention like The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Also, I read that book before I started, and there were like some elements that inspired me with that book as well, by V. Schwab.
Yes, she's amazing too. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah,
absolutely. As far as like classic Southern Gothic authors, William Gay is one of the authors that helped really like influence my style of writing with some parts of this novel. Probably like the darker overtones and some of the like religious overtones that I kind of put in there. His work is saturated with that. And Flannery O'Connor, love her writing.
Amazing.
I could never aspire to such great heights, but there's just such a rich, cultural heritage of like Southern authors who are amazing. And I think that Witches set in the South, with all of the cultural folklore and everything that comes with the South, is kind of it's kind of a natural thing to have happened. And so that's kind of why it all worked, I think. And people are kind of fascinated by my part of the country. yeah, there's a little bit of an interest with our region, and I definitely wanted to portray things honestly, and have things be a little bit a little bit more open about what it's really like in the Ozarks. And from a historical standpoint, my next book is also set in the Ozarks. So if people like that setting, they're going to get to go back in 2024 whenever my next book comes out. So
yeah, no, I loved it being, I don't think that I hadn't read a lot of books set in the Ozarks, and I think that like a lot of great settings, it felt like almost like another character in the novel. You couldn't have written it anywhere else. It had to take place there, so I thought that was great. And I love reading about different areas of the country, of the world, and different perspectives. I loved it.
Yeah.
What is this is just a fun question, because I get these questions a lot. Like, if you would like, who, if it was made into a movie, who would you like to play Gracie or Deirdre?
Oh my, I thought about this a lot for Parting the Veil. I haven't really thought about it a lot for The Witch of Tin Mountain. I really, and she wouldn't be able to play Gracie at this point, but have you seen Cold Mountain?
Oh yeah.
Ruby, Renee Zellweger.
That was Renee. I was going to say Nicole Kidman. No, it was Renee
She
Zellweger.
reminds me a lot of Gracie. Like, I picture that kind of like that look and that type of girl. I thinking about that, Elle Fanning would be a good Gracie. I think
she would. Yeah. I
she
also think
like
Sadie Sink, I think is her name, from Stranger Things, the redheaded girl from Stranger Things. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the Taylor Swift video. If you're like, I have Taylor Swift fans in my house. I think she would be great too. I was thinking that while I was reading it. Jacqueline asks, who was the author that you just cited? Is it William Gay? Did you say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, G-A-Y, William Gay.
Okay, William Gay. And then I have a couple more questions, and apparently the chat is disabled. So if you have questions for Paulette, just put them in the Q&A, and I will I'll field them there. But I have a couple more questions. I'm not done yet. So what is your favorite part of the writing process, and what is the part that you totally dread?
My favorite part is probably brainstorming and then revisions. Those are pretty equally like my favorites.
Yeah.
I have to brainstorm with pen and paper, or pencil and paper. I usually have tons of journals that I just fill with my illegible handwriting that I go back later and try to decipher it. But like, I put character studies in my journals, and I do all kinds of like work ahead of time before I start drafting. And then revisions, like making everything prettier, making the sentences prettier. I love like really going in after I get the story down, like the meat of the story down, and going in and making things prettier and more beautiful in the prose, like focusing more on the prose. And like little ideas will come to me during revisions to kind of enrich the story. I draft really lean. I'm usually about 75,000 words on my first draft or so. But I usually end up adding about 30,000 more words or so during revisions. So I really go all in with revisions. I enjoy it. Drafting is my least favorite part.
Yeah, that same. I'm absolutely the same all around. Like, I like, it's like blood from a stone during the drafting, and I really love the revision process myself, and then with my editors, I just love that part. Yeah, just trying to make it the best it can be. But the draft is painful. So what is you are, I feel like I'm just a lurker lately on social media and Signal channel chat, whatever, but you are really generous, like giving advice to aspiring authors. And so what advice do you have for people that are just starting out, trying to get published, trying to get their first manuscript done? What's some of your best writing advice?
So a couple of things. Getting a story down is better than making it perfect. You always have time to do that later. So your drafts, and I am the world's worst perfectionist, so I am preaching to the choir here. But whenever I was a younger writer, because I've been writing like seriously with a mind toward publishing fiction since I was about 19 years old. And I never finished a book until I got to be 42 years old, because I would get so wrapped up in making things perfect that I wouldn't like see a book through until the very end. And so I wanted to be a writer. And so it's like I had to get out of my own way.
Yeah.
And I see that a lot with newer writers and writers that are very excellent writers and have a natural gift for writing, that they get kind of caught up in the details. And, if you'll just get that first draft down, you can always make it better. You can't make something better if it's not there.
Yes.
And so that's my advice. And some people do really well with revising as they draft. I am not one of those people. I get stuck.
Mhm.
So I had to learn that. And also, as far as like just a general like piece of advice I tell people is to read everything that you can, read cross genre, read
Yes.
books that you wouldn't necessarily think that you would normally like, because everything that you read teaches you something. It either will teach you something that you want to do or something maybe that you don't want to do, but like you can't really know until you read it. And like I learned a lot by reading romance. I learned a lot by reading mysteries, just kind of learning about commercial fiction, because I kind of came from a little bit more of a, I was an English major in college before I let college go. And my writing tended to be really didactic and academic sounding. And so reading commercial fiction and like having that influence me a little bit helped get me out of that rut to where I was like writing really dry stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
would have never probably been picked up. Yeah.
No, I get it. I do. That's all excellent advice. I think that is, so I think a lot of writers struggle with just getting the first whole draft down, I think because it's like, oh, it's not good enough. This part's not good enough. I'm the worst. I can't do it. Like the doubt on your shoulder, all of that stuff.
Yes.
And yeah. And reading outside genre or across all genres is such excellent advice too. Sometimes when I'm writing historical fiction, I don't like to read historical fiction. And and I just read, I don't know if you've read it, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabriel Zevin, I believe is the author.
I haven't yet, but I saw that one the other day. It looks really intriguing.
It's something I would never have picked up, but it's obviously gotten a lot of buzz. And I was like, just astonished with the writing. It was just really, and it was so, as a writer, it makes you think about like, how did she do that? And how did like jump around in time and place? And yeah, so,
That's
so that
really
was
cool.
That was one that made me think, so a couple more questions, and then please, I see a couple of questions in the chat. If you have any more, please type them in. Two-part question. Do you Zoom with book clubs? And what's the best way for readers to stay in touch with you?
I absolutely Zoom with book clubs. I love Zooming and being a guest in book clubs. So hit me up for that. I really enjoy that. And, I'm also like willing to like be a guest host on book club pages on Facebook and things like that too, if you would rather do it that way. So I enjoy that. And the best way to keep up with me, I'm upping my newsletter because
Nice.
I've been neglecting my newsletter. So my newsletter is a good way to keep in touch with me. If you go to paulettekennedy.com, you'll see a sign up to subscribe to my newsletter. But also I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, and I'm even on TikTok, although I'm not super active there yet. But on all my social media, I'm P. Kennedy Writes. So.
Okay. Excellent. And speaking of newsletter, I got your newsletter and I was like, oh, this is a really good newsletter. Like I have to do better. I was very impressed. I have a mailing list for invitations and events and stuff, but I need to like do a real newsletter. It was well done. Well done, you.
Thank you. It stresses me out, but it's more anticipation of doing it every month, because I was doing it every month, like during my debut year. And then like last year, it was just a really hard year. So I had to let some things go. So I let my newsletter go. But like I'm picking it back up again. I really love like designing all the little graphics and things like that on Canva and writing it.
Yeah. Newsletter envy. You just talked about your next book. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my next book just got acquired by Lake Union in December.
Yay.
So it'll be my third novel. It's called The Devil and Mrs Davenport. and it's not about Satan. Well, I guess I'm just putting that out there right now.
Yeah.
But it is like it takes place in the 1950s, and my main character is she's a homemaker, so she's a stay-at-home mom, and she's kind of like that classic 1950s like housewife. But she's Pentecostal. She's very like kind of like that real conservative like religion that's fairly common where I'm from. And she develops psychic powers suddenly after a viral illness.
Oh.
And so she actually becomes a medium, and she starts being able to speak with spirits that have passed on, and they are starting to seek her out. And so she's like reconciling this with her conservative husband and her faith and all of this. And so it's kind of like a little bit of wrestling with identity. She's like 27 when the story starts. And so she's just trying to kind of figure out why this is happening to her and what purpose it serves in her life. And it's a very, I call it's Shirley Jackson meets Sharp Objects.
Shirley Jackson. Yeah. Oh, cool.
Yeah. And she's also a writer. So it's like, I pull a little bit of like, I read a lot about Shirley Jackson's life whenever I was researching the novel before I started drafting it. So there's a lot of like little Shirley Jackson Easter eggs throughout the book.
Oh, cool.
And it's Gothic too, but it's more of like a domestic Gothic. So we have like this house that they live in, and at first it's like the perfect like white picket fence, this nice suburban house set in the fictional town of Myrna Grove, Missouri. And then Loretta, my main character, starts noticing that something's up with the house. Like there's cracks that are forming in the ceiling and in the walls, and so that's kind of like part of the Gothic element that comes up into the story as well. So it's really fun to write.
Cool. Huge congratulations. It sounds amazing. Yeah.
Thanks.
And then, there's some questions in the chat. This is actually a question I usually ask. Anne Pierpont asks, how the cover evolved and tell me, just because the cover is beautiful. If you want to hold it up again, it's really cool. I love it. And so how did you have a lot to say? I remember seeing some iterations of this a while back, and I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, Amanda Hudson, she designed both of my covers for both my books, Parting the Veil and this one. She's amazing. She's with Face Out Studios, and I requested her specifically to design the cover for The Witch of Tin Mountain. So yes, as you know from being a Lake Union author, we have a lot of input on our covers.
Yes, thank goodness.
And that's one of the wonderful things about our publisher. I had about 5 different concepts that were sent to me after I contributed to the creative brief, which was really fun to do. So with a creative brief, you can kind of talk about what color schemes you like and like what other covers that were from recent books that you really liked or that inspired you. So you get to like insert all of that into your creative brief, and then your editor sends it on to the art department, and then the art department takes all that information and they generate all these covers. And sometimes it's really hard to choose because there can be some really, really cool concepts. And we have a lot to say. And there were 2 really strong contenders that stood out with my covers, and they were totally different. Like each one was completely different. I'll have to show my newsletter subscribers what the other cover looked like, the other one that we kind of narrowed it down to so they can see. But I ended up going with this concept because I felt like it really conveyed that it was historical fiction. And it also was like very spooky and kind of creepy in a way that the other one maybe wasn't. So it kind of brought in a little bit more atmosphere, I felt like. And plus, we had that fog and the trees and all of that kind of crowding into the margins. And I really like that.
And I like the color scheme too. I like the color, like the palette is really nice too.
Yeah, that greenish color. It's kind of funny. I was talking about this on Twitter, I think. Before a tornado, the sky kind of turns that color.
Oh,
and yeah, it kind of turns kind of a sickly like pea soup color. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like even I love the color, but she kind of like conveyed that a little bit, which I thought was super cool.
Yeah, totally. Excellent. So, and another excellent question from Anne that I often ask, and I forgot to tonight. Do you ever get so engaged with your characters that you don't want the story to be over? Like, do you get attached and you don't want it to be over?
Yes, I do get attached. And especially I would say like in revisions when, like when we're wrapping up copy edits, because like that's literally the last time we can make really big changes to the manuscript. And like after that, the arcs get published. And so like when I'm having to let go, it is kind of hard, but also I'm relieved.
Yes.
Because it's like at that point, like we've read our own book, like, gosh, how many times, Jane? Yeah, a million times. And we could like recite the story by heart.
Pretty much.
And usually we're starting to work on our next one at that point. So it's like, I'm also kind of ready to let those characters go and like live their best life and in the readers' minds and the readers' imaginations. It's like after that arc is out in the world, it belongs to the readers now. It's no longer mine. And so, well, I do love all of my characters, and they're like my imaginary children in some ways. I'm also always kind of ready to start the next book.
Yeah, I totally feel that. And then not a question, but a comment from Barbara Harrington. And I think that we'll wrap it up after this. This is really lovely. Not a question, but I love Paulette's advice on just getting it written down and worrying about making it pretty later. I am not a writer. I'm just trying to write my history for my grandsons. And I often get stuck trying to make it perfect the first time. I think, Barbara, you are not alone. Like, I think that's one of the biggest challenges for all writers. And if you're writing your history, I think you're a writer. I think you can say you're a writer too.
I agree.
Yes. Yeah. So Paulette, this was amazing. I'm so thrilled for all your success. I hope it continues to climb up the charts February 1st. And everyone, hold up, if you want to hold up the cover again, because I have it on my Kindle. So yes, Witch of Tin Mountain.
I've got my green screen on, so it's kind of
yeah. Congratulations! I know it looks kind of spooky coming in.
Yeah, it's a little spooky, and I've got a lamp on behind me. And it's like
excellent.
Emanating from my folder.
Congratulations, and everyone, where to get in touch with Paulette. And I wish you all the success. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Jane. I appreciate you having me.
Yes. Take care.
You too.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.